From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Library of Congress. Today's presentation, a book talk about This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism by Ashton Applewhite, is presented by the Library's Office of Equal Employment Opportunity and Diversity Programs. Today's guest, Ashton Applewhite, didn't set out to become a writer. She went into publishing because she loved to read, and according to her, because she didn't have any better ideas. She had a weakness for the kind of jokes that make you cringe and burst out laughing at the same time. Her boss kept telling her to write them down, and the collection turned into the best-selling paperback of 1982. She was a clue on the television game show Jeopardy! Who is the author of Truly Tasteless Jokes? The answer, Blanche Knott, her pseudonym. And as Blanche, she made publishing history by occupying 4 of the 15 spots on the New York Times bestseller list. The first woman to ever do so, if I'm not mistaken. First person. Incredibly impressive. Her first serious book, Cutting Loose, Why Women Who End Their Marriages Do So Well, was published by HarperCollins in 1997. Ms. Magazine named it or called it rocket fuel for launching new lives. Since 2000, she has been on staff at the American Museum of Natural History, where she writes about everything under the sun. The catalyst for This Chair Rocks was puzzlement, as she says. Why is our view of late life so unreliably grim when the lived reality is so different? She began blogging about aging and ageism in 2007 and started speaking on the subject in July of 2012, which is also when she started her blog, Yo, Is This Ageist? During that time, she has become a Knight Fellow, a New York Times Fellow, a Fellow at Yale Law School, and she has written for Harper's, Playboy, and many other publications. And she has been recognized by the New York Times, National Public Radio, and the American Society on Aging as an expert on ageism. Her book, This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism, was published earlier this year in March. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming the wonderfully and honestly humorous and incredible author, Ashton Applewhite.
Thank you. I never open with my full bio, except I was going to today, but then Roberto beat me to it because I was going to tell my unorthodox literary career, starting with all the publishing companies that turned down Truly Tasteless Jokes before it was a phenom, well before. It was called What's the Difference Between Garbage and a Girl from New Jersey? The Book of Tasteless Jokes. And my 2 favorite decline notes, Simon & Schuster said, publish this? We can't even Xerox this. And Viking Penguin said if we published this, the little bird would have to hide its head under its wing in shame. But then Ballantine published it and went on to make publishing history of a sort. This isn't in the bio. I am responsible for the New York Times bestseller list introducing the other and how-to category because Barbara Tuchman and other fancy schmancy editors at Random House felt that Blanche was besmirching the bestseller list, and they invented a separate category. That is true. And so then HarperCollins published my divorce book, and then 20 years later I wrote, I don't like writing. I like the thinking part, but not the writing part. So I wrote this and submitted it to HarperCollins, and they turned it down because no one else was writing about this. And a lot of other publishers turned it down, and I didn't want to sell it for a little bit of money, so I ended up self-publishing. So this is a self-published book. And I just want to tip my hat to Roberto because you could have knocked me over with a feather. There was a profile of me in the Washington Post that some of you may have seen, and he told me today that that's what he saw. But that was just a few weeks. The book was just 3 weeks old. So thank you, everyone, Library of Congress, for taking a chance on a book that no one had heard of, which is getting out there in a really nice way. The reason I wrote this book, in hindsight, was because I was afraid of getting old. And I didn't know that was the reason. But I started a project inspired by my mother-in-law, who was in her 80s at the time, and she said, why don't you write, she's a bookseller, she and her husband, and she said, why don't you write about something people ask us all the time? So when are you going to retire? So I thought, well, that's catchy, and it's, you know, upbeat and optimistic. And the blog at the time, the first one was called SoWhenAreYouGonnaRetire.com. And I started interviewing people in their 80s and 90s who were working, and they were amazing, and they were a dime a dozen, neither of which surprised me. But I also started reading and researching about longevity. And what I learned so soon and so easily just knocked me over. I mean, again and again, like, for example, I thought the odds of ending up in a nursing home were, you know, pretty good. And it turns out that the percentage of the American population over 65 in nursing homes is 4%, down from 5. It's dropping steadily. And that people were happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their lives. It's called the U-curve of happiness, and it's incredibly well substantiated, independent of class, all around the world. The older people get, the less afraid of dying, etc. I mean, I won't bore you with more statistics, but I just thought, why don't people know this stuff? And we don't know it because we live in a culture that drowns out all but the negative about life after 65. And the reason behind that writ large is because if aging is a problem, then they can sell you stuff to fix it. And if aging is a disease, then they can sell you stuff to cure it. And it's not curable, it's not fixable, it's not a problem, it's not a disease, it's a natural, powerful, lifelong process. And I wanted to tell that story. And of course then suggest that we call out the voices that frame it as decline alone. So I'm going to start with a definition of ageism. The formal definition is discrimination and stereotyping on the basis of age. And we're ageist whenever we behave towards someone or think differently about a person or a group on the basis of how old we think they are. And it's not a household word or a sexy one, but neither was sexism until the women's movement turned it into a howl for equal rights. And as with all ism, stereotyping lies at the heart of ageism, the assumption that all members of a group are the same. It's why people think everyone in a retirement home is the same age. That would be old. Even though residents can range from people in their 50s to centenarians. So imagine, can you imagine anyone thinking that way about a group of people from 20 to 60, right? And as the older we get, the more different from one another we become because we age at different rates, physically, socially, cognitively. So that's why doctors say, if you've seen one 80-year-old, you've seen one 80-year-old. Like racism and sexism, ageism is socially constructed idea that has changed over time and that serves a social and economic purpose. It's not about how we look. It's about how people in power assign meaning to how we look. And unless we challenge stigma, we reproduce it. We experience ageism anytime someone assumes we're too old for something, a task, a relationship, a haircut, instead of finding out who we are and what we're capable of. Or if someone assumes we're too young, ageism cuts both ways, as when people complain about lazy millennials or say kids are like that. Now I see ageism everywhere. When old pals cringe at public mention of how long they've known each other, that's my old pal Judy Karasik, met her in 9th grade, instead of savoring their shared history.
And what year was that?
Oh, you're going to make me do math? I was 15. Can I just say how old I am? That's easier. I'm 64. When men and women feel compelled to lie about their age on online dating sites. When people bridle at being kindly offered a seat on the bus, on billboards and television, in hospitals and hotels, over dinner and on the subway. At age 80, who doesn't need a facelift? A poster announcing a subway station renovation asked sprightly. That was on the MTA in New York, where I live. In the incessant barrage of messages from every quarter that consigns the no longer young to the margins of society, in our mindless absorption of these messages and numb collusion in our own disenfranchisement. I've learned that most of what I thought I knew about the aging process was wrong. That staying in the dark serves powerful commercial and medical and political interests that don't serve mine. And that seeing clearly is healthier and happier. So my instructions are to be wonky. I'll start out being wonky, and then if I'm too wonky, you can... So here's really interesting information which really surprised me when I learned it, that links ageist stereotypes to our physical and mental health, that it actually, attitudes towards aging affect how our minds and bodies function at the cellular level. A growing body of fascinating research documents the link between people's perceptions of aging and their health and behavior. Yale psychologist Becca Levy has been measuring the effect of age stereotypes for close to 20 years. Over and over, she and her colleagues have found that people with more positive feelings about aging behave differently as they age, compared to those convinced that growing old means becoming useless or helpless. Long-term studies show that positive attitudes towards aging are associated with better functional health and more predictive of health status than socioeconomic status or race or gender. That's really interesting, right? Implicit interventions, flashing positive age stereotypes in the form of words like active and creative on a screen so briefly that you just absorb it subliminally, improved not just self-perception, but physical functions like balance. People with more positive views of aging do better on memory tests. They have better handwriting, which correlates with good health, and they can walk faster. And they recover more fully from complete disability, severe disability. And they live longer, and not just a little bit longer, an average of 7.5 years longer. Those unable to overcome a lifetime of internalized ageism, on the other hand, were less likely to seek health care or to exercise and died earlier. A goal of public health and aging policy is more healthy years, not years without health. Imagine the benefits to health and human potential of overturning ageist stereotypes before they distort self-image, shorten steps, and limit prospects. Think what overturning ageist stereotypes would do to extend not just the lifespan, but the health span of all Americans. I'm going to leave plenty of time for a Q&A after this, because there's also really interesting data about attitudes towards aging and cognitive function, so feel free to ask me about that. And also my favorite study in this vein was they took two groups of college students, and with one they did the same flashing of messages with words like, I love the choice, Florida and bingo were two of the words. And then with the other group, they either neutral messages or positive messages. And what they measured in the test was the fact that the group of college kids that had received the negative messages subliminally walked to the elevator more slowly than the other group. And those are 18-year-olds. So imagine we get a lifetime of messages about, debility and other, ugly things, what that does to the point at which they do actually have the potential to become self-fulfilling stereotypes. Okay, so how about the myth that older workers take jobs away from younger ones, which is a fallacy called the lump of labor that economists have debunked countless times. When older workers stick around, it does affect the upward mobility of younger workers. It is not easy to balance legitimate seniority, the greater knowledge and experience of older workers, with the ambition of younger ones to rise through the ranks. Instead of working toward equitable solutions, though, companies exploit the problem by pitting older and younger employees against each other, as early 20th century manufacturers did with workers of different races or nationalities, and as Walmart and Amazon do today with union and non-union employees. In an ageist and capitalist society where corporate profits come first, those tactics go unchallenged. The problem is structural, which these tactics deflect the attention away from. High unemployment rates aren't a too many old people problem. They're a labor market problem. The amount and nature of work is not fixed. Otherwise, the expansion of the female workforce in the 20th century would have put hordes of men on the streets, for example, but it didn't. If the job market is strong, a big if, workers of all ages benefit. Having more salaries generates more tax revenue. Seasoned talent is valuable, and it's not a zero-sum proposition. Older people are job creators. According to a 2012 Pew Charitable Trust report, quote, evidence suggests that greater employment of older persons leads to better outcomes for the young, reduced unemployment, increased employment, and higher wages, unquote. It's not only that older workers don't crowd out younger ones, they also increase employment among the young in many ways. As bigger earners, they can buy more products produced by the young. They may be business owners who employ younger workers, and of course, they pass along valuable skills. An aging population also means unprecedented opportunities for innovative kinds of jobs that involve intergenerational collaboration. Older workers are typically better at seeing the big picture and can draw on institutional knowledge, especially in a joint like this, I bet. While youngers likely have an edge when it comes to seeing what's new and integrating technology. Pitting workers against each other also fails the common sense test. It's not as though our lives and financial obligations are contained by generational moats. Children inherit. Grandparents exhaust their savings or help with tuitions. A Social Security check makes everyone in the household more financially secure. People with steady incomes help unemployed family and friends stay afloat. Independent of age and biology, tribes and networks support us all. And now a little rant about one of my least favorite terms, which is agelessness, which you see being touted. You know, all sorts of things are just going to keep us ageless. Like anti-aging, I'm not going to read the bit. There's a wonderful British writer named Anne Karp who wrote a terrific book called How to Age. And you know, aging is living, living is aging. So think about that when a product touts its anti-aging properties. And she said, you can no more be anti-aging than anti-breathing. So, offering neutral ground, an end run around all these messy ambiguities, agelessness sounds so seductive, doesn't it? On a tube of eye cream, agelessness promises to erase the trace of time. In pop culture, it describes people who stay young in their 50s and 60s. In gerontology, it suggests that a youthful spirit can remain unaltered within an aging body. None of these scenarios is possible, and they're all ageist. As sociologist Molly Andrews has argued, quote, the current tendency towards agelessness is itself a form of ageism, depriving the old of one of their most hard-earned resources, their age, our years, right? Rather, this is agefulness, an accretion of all the things we've done and been, not cataloged or curated, but stored random access within our bones and brains that makes us who we are. Hag, spinster, crone, old fogey, old fart, old goat, little old lady, dirty old man, sweet old thing, geezer, biddy, codger, fogey, coot. These stereotypes are ours to reject or subvert on the way to more compelling and accurate aspirational identities. At the moment, I'm leaning toward hag, something a driver actually called me last year when I banged on the trunk of his car after he bombed through the pedestrian crosswalk. Hag, outside of Shakespeare, really? Maybe it was my funny fake fur cat hat that undid him. I wish I were young again. People say this all the time. When pressed, however, few would actually move their game pieces back to the beginning of the board, or anywhere close, unless they could transport their present-day consciousness back in time as well. Adolescence again? No thanks, even though I'd get to have more time with Judy. I'd love my 18-year-old cartilage back, but I'd dance more now because I'm less self-conscious and I prioritize better. Whatever our trajectories, however we've navigated loving and letting go, whether children or houses or dreams, we are the sum of those experiences and what we learn from them. They make us us. That is agefulness, rich and deep and invaluable. So, this is from a section called What Makes It So Hard to Ask for Help? In this country, no myth is more powerful than that of rugged individualism. The notion that success and independence are paired and that relying on others signals not just physical frailty, but weakness of character. That myth serves us poorly, especially people with disabilities and older people, two increasingly overlapping circles in the Venn diagram of life. Dignity and freedom of choice are and remain critically important, of course. Yet the way we grow old is governed by a whole range of variables, including environment, personality, and genes, compounded by class, gender, race, luck, and the churnings of the global economy, over which we have varying degrees of control. What happens when we can't hoist a big suitcase into the luggage rack anymore, or drive at night, or drive at all? When we can't hear the instructions anymore, or read the directions, or understand them? When we can no longer make it to the bathroom, or even heave ourselves out of bed? A culture that idealizes self-reliance amplifies those anxieties and silences questions about the structures that strand us. Where's the low luggage rack? Why no large print, or audio assist, or person to ask? Why should diapers at the end of life be any more shameful than at the beginning? This culture demands optimism without end, downplays life's challenges, and shames us when, inevitably, we fall short. This ethic of individualism serves the proponents of small government, who conveniently ignore the role of services paid for by their fellow citizens in making many of them wealthy. This ethic has systematically eroded communitarian values and sanctioned the U.S. government's abdication of responsibility for its vulnerable citizens. The effects can be seen in decades of concerted efforts to shrink the welfare state and public assistance programs, even though exactly the opposite is called for if the country is to meet the enormous challenge of caring for its older citizens in the years to come. As long as those challenges are ours to shoulder alone, there's no point in addressing or even identifying any of the larger factors that make it hard for people to navigate the transitions of late life. Consider the terrible story of the Crabtree family. Jim Crabtree's wife developed early onset Alzheimer's at age 56. For 6 years, Crabtree's parents were able to watch her during the day, but his 84-year-old dad was experiencing cognitive problems, and his mother, 80, suffered from severe arthritis. In May 2013, Crabtree's father shot both women and himself while his son was at work. Crabtree told NBC's Maria Shriver that it was a great gift from his father, since it, quote, ended my Alzheimer's and elder care issues at once, and since the 3 who died were all ready to go. I mean, he loved them. You know, he was devastated, but that's how he saw it. NBC's only comment was that caregiving is tough. What does that say about our society? Imagine an alternative scenario: decent, affordable health care, subsidized caregiving, and help from a team of social workers, friends, and neighbors. That support would have gone a long way to help Jim Crabtree's family cope and spare them this horrific end. His mother's only illness was arthritis. Stories like these have even healthy, middle-aged people wondering whether suicide, or say triple murder, will be the ethical alternative to asking for help. These are lethal forms of internalized ageism, and they handily serve the American government's 21st century austerity program. I just imagine this like lightning bolt coming over from the Capitol and like smiting me at the lectern, but gotta smite back. And let's see, just one more. The call to action. Although we age in different ways and at different rates, everyone wakes up a day older. Aging is difficult, but few of us opt out, and the passage of time confers very real benefits upon us. By blinding us to those benefits and heightening our fears, ageism makes growing older in America far harder than it has to be. That's why I've embarked on a crusade to overturn American culture's dumb and destructive obsession with youth. As I've gone on this journey from the personal to the political, it's become clear that ageism is woven deeply into our capitalist system, and that upending it will involve social and political upheaval. Ageism, unlike aging, is not inevitable. In the 20th century, the women's movement and the civil rights movements woke mainstream America up to entrenched systems of racism and sexism. And a digression here is that all change starts inside each of us, and that's why the tool that catalyzed the women's movement was consciousness raising. Women came together and compared notes and realized in the process that issues that they had been thinking were personal problems, whether it was, not being respected at work or, tying it all to their material status in the world, that these were not personal problems. These were widely shared political problems that required collective action. And that's, all of us, that, getting older is not easy. There are real challenges, and we need to deal with them. But the way it's framed in the culture now is, you're not doing a good enough job, or it's your fault if you can't, if you have wrinkles, or you can't, date, find someone to date or whatever. And while those are our problems, they are widely shared political problems also, right? So we need to come together and talk about that and mobilize against them as a group. More recently, disability rights and gay rights and trans rights activists have brought ableism and homophobia and transphobia to the streets and the courts of law. It is high time to add ageism to the roster, to include age in our criteria for diversity. Duh. And to mobilize against discrimination on the basis of age. It is as unacceptable as discrimination on the basis of any aspect of ourselves other than our characters. If marriage equality is here to stay, why not age equality? If gay pride has gone mainstream and millions of Americans now proudly identify as disabled, which is an amazing transition in this society where physical and cognitive perfection are so prized, why not age pride, right? Aging is an accomplishment. The only reason that idea sounds outlandish is because this is the first time you've encountered it. It won't be the last. Longevity is here to stay. Everyone is aging, and ending ageism benefits us all. This book is a call to wake up to the ageism in and around us, embrace a more nuanced and accurate view of growing older, cheer up, and push back. What ideas about aging have each of us internalized without even realizing it? Where have those ideas come from? And what purpose do they serve? How do they play out across our lives, from office to bedroom, in muscle and memory? And what changes inside us once we perceive these destructive forces at work? What might an age-friendly world, friendly to all ages, that is, look like? What can we do, individually and collectively, to provoke the necessary shift in consciousness and catalyze a radical age movement to make it happen? I hope you will join me in it. Thank you. Uh-oh.
Your opening questions. Congratulations on a great turnout.
Thank you.
I have to say that I'm in charge of a senior and aging and senior culture area of studies in professional organization. We could talk later. And I have a great, a great challenge in getting people to.
Yeah, people think aging, yuck.
It's not sexy. But you're making it sexy.
Thank you.
But, okay, and I'm so glad that you're expanding the term. I mean, we think of ageism mostly with older people, and of course, maybe the prejudice is mostly there. But then you look.
We
at
are all in this together. Everyone was young. Everyone's going to get old.
But okay, and everybody goes through different ages. But I can't escape the age cohort that I'm in. I'm a baby boomer like you are, and I don't think I have all those characteristics. And how injurious are these Gen X categories, millennial categories, and so on, and silent generation? Thank God I know people from the silent generation who are anything but.
Shocker.
Yeah, and so I mean, they grew up in the 50s, so that's how they got the term. How injurious are those, and how useful are those terms, and how do we combat them?
They're useful demographically, and obviously, I too use them.
Yeah.
But if any generalization about an individual on the basis of their age is, inherently problematic, and if, stereotypes are always wrong, but especially in the case of age, because the older we are, the more different from one another. So obviously to attribute a characteristic to an entire generation is absurd.
Yeah.
Although clearly there are, we listen to the same music growing up, and there's certain legitimate, characteristics that can be attributed to us. The bigger problem with it, though, and it is something I touched on in the work thing, is that it is an attempt to frame the issue in terms of scarcity, in terms of zero sum, in terms of conflict. And as long as it's old versus young, and it's been, this thinking has been debunked in countless fields by countless experts. It pits us against each other and deflects our attention away from the actual issue. Whether in the workforce, it's that, it's the way the job market is structured. In caregiving, I don't want to be stuck with, caring for old people. I mean, so that's the problem with it, really, is that it implicit in it is the assumption that the generations are pitted against each other. And we really need to think radically in the broadest possible terms about how to meet the challenge of an aging population, because, of course, the people who are now 20, 30, 40 are going to benefit from it. Here's another example. It's why I say all age friendly. When they frame it as we have to do this expensive stuff to help poor, pathetic old people get up the stairs, ramps also help people on crutches. Ramps also help women with strollers and men with strollers and people on skateboards. And right, so this ditto in the workforce. Flex time and making buildings accessible. People of all ages and anyone trying to balance work life, anyone with any kind of caregiving responsibilities. Yes, those accommodations benefit older workers disproportionately, but they also benefit people of all ages. So really try and push back. Oh, and here's another thought. Sorry, really long answer. But when we think of it in generational terms, it's we often talk about allocating resources by age, and you see this around healthcare all the time. We have enough money to help newborns, but why does that old guy need a 16th hip replacement? Well, if they botched my first 15, I'd like a crack at the 16th. I would. But here's the larger point. Don't get sucked into that argument like I just did. We no longer accept the idea of allocating resources by race or by sex, and it is not any more acceptable to do it by age, period. Yes?
What intrigued me is that I'm realizing, as someone who sits all day at my job, that I'm not even as mobile as my 80-year-old father. So that intrigued me when you're talking about ramps and all that. I feel like I'm going to need all these things.
We probably will. We all will.
I was wondering, using the term, do you think with the baby boomers aging, will that get more people involved in this cause to help the rest of us coming behind us? Because when I went to Honduras and saw all the older people still with their families, getting around, we don't do that. But then if my dad wasn't more mobile than me, I would have to be taking care of him and trying to go to work. So
I mean, that is a colossal question, of course. And when I was floundering, which I was for a long time, trying to figure out what my way through this topic was, at one point I woke up in the middle of the night and bought the domain name Both Are True. Seriously, because you can argue, with regard to the baby boom, the good news is I think most of us are getting old enough to realize we're actually gonna get old. And some of us will be radicalized, and I'm really hoping that those of us who, I grew up in D.C. and I remember, the big marches, the anti-war stuff. So, and people a little older, I miss the heart of the women's movement, but my talks are almost always attended by more women, and I think there's a lot of women who learned about sexism and who can apply what they learned to ageism. So I'm hoping, that we mobilize. On the other hand, there is, the counterforce is, we're baby boomers, we're special, we're healthier than ever, we are somehow exempt, and that if we, eat more sushi, do more, sit-ups, we can escape it, and that is age denial, and that's what a lot of AARP, Thunderbolt, but that is their message. There's no gray hair in their magazine. There's no talk about disability. There's no talk about people over 70, and we need to embrace the whole kit and caboodle. We need to do it, for the full age spectrum. So, when you go to Honduras, see what works there and see what you can do to bring it about even in just your family life or your community. And I mean, there's a ton of energy. Yes. The short answer to your question is yes, because the baby boom is aging, a ton of resources are pouring in, some of them progressive and some of them just looking to make money. I mean, now that federal prisons can't be for-profit anymore, guess what those guys are investing in? For-profit nursing homes, for example. Yeah, hi.
So, in terms of ideas for building this movement and an action plan, it seems one of the reasons that this may be more urgent than ever is because the Supreme Court basically eviscerated the Older Workers Act and legalized age discrimination. So where are the actual points? Who are the people who are working on building the movement? And what would be the next step in terms of building that?
I've never built a movement before. I'm speaking tomorrow at a conference called the Positive Aging Conference.
International Conference on Positive Aging.
There we go. Thank you.
Where is that?
It's at the Capitol Hilton. And I'm sure you could show up if you wanted. I met a fellow from London just before I came down here who started this group with a colleague called the Age of No Retirement. There are lots and lots of people coming together on this. And one of the ideas, and there's going to be a meeting at part of the Positive Aging thing, a sort of smaller meeting sponsored by the National Council on Aging to answer exactly that question. I will throw it back at you to say, if you know anything about this, do what you can to make it happen. It's going to take all of us, and I sorry to sound like a shill, but I really urge you to get people to read my book because it's really persuasive. And Dave, Dave is attending the conference,
The
so.
thing about Ashton's book, and I
Oh,
just
God.
was
I didn't pay her to say
Ashton's
this.
book when it was published, never met her before, is that for all of us who are working out there, I'm an elder care anarchist, and when I say that, everybody goes, yes. But you have all these grassroots people, all these people who have a vision. But because of you being gutsy enough to sit there and say, hey, I didn't get a publisher, and this has to be published, you created a focal point. You created a gathering point. And I'm trying to remember the name of the group in New York.
Oh, the radical age movement?
Yes,
That's another grassroots thing. But I'm one focal point, but this is my proxy. There's thousands of those. And so I don't want to be the focal point. I want there to be 10,000 focal points, and honestly, I don't know what form. I know some stuff that we need. We need clearinghouses, we need an association, but it is really happening. Yes, in the back corner, and then the woman in front of you. You in the blue shirt? Yes.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what your research has shown about, I think a common fear of getting old is dementia and Alzheimer's. What can you say about that?
Well, for one thing, no one knows that rates of Alzheimer's have dropped precipitously in the last few decades. The absolute number of people with Alzheimer's is growing because the percentage of people of the population who are old is larger, but the chances of any one individual getting Alzheimer's have diminished significantly. So the real epidemic is anxiety over memory loss, which you hear in every time. I used to think senior moment quips were kind of cute, they were self-deprecating. And then finally, it dawned on me that when I lost the car keys in high school, I didn't call it a junior moment. And that every time you make a joke like that, you reinforce to whoever you're making it to and to yourself that cognitive decline inevitably accompanies aging. 20% of the population escapes cognitive decline entirely. We all know some of those super sharp 90-year-olds, right? Most of us will lose some processing function, especially the thing where you can't remember the name of the movie you saw with what's-her-name at that place. But the main picture is most of us don't lose much more than that. It's just like you have, and the physical decline is inevitable, but most of us remain able to do some version of the things we love. The really interesting thing about Alzheimer's is that there are a bunch of long-term studies and results keep coming in now. When people die, they autopsy them, that brains of some of the people who were completely sharp were filled with Alzheimer's type plaques and tangles. And what those people had in common is a sense of purpose, a positive attitude towards aging. So, this ties back to what I think is a really compelling argument. So anyone out there in public health or who knows anyone in public health, an anti-ageism campaign as a public health initiative is a really smart idea. Because what's the main obstacle to having a purpose in late life? Structural discrimination that sidelines older people. So let's work on that. I hope that answered your question. And now the woman there, yes.
Okay.
Can you speak any louder?
I was listening to something the other day on the news, and you can tell that the healthcare is really starting to discriminate against you getting older, because there's a lot of states now who have pulled out affordable care because of the fact that they don't want to do the thing with Medicare and Medicare. And so you have all of those issues where now you have to almost look at what state you go to for your health care, because your particular insurance company may be pulling out of that piece. So then you're going to get discriminated against because of the affordable health care with the, you know, because that has created a really great thing about the pre-existing conditions. And so you have to almost look at what state you retire in to look at their health care system and what insurance companies
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, it's a problem. You, and then you, and then you. So the gentleman in the corner.
In terms of coalition building, I wonder if you've heard the term TAB.
Total temporarily able-bodied?
Yeah, offered by the disability community, just to remind people that it's a normal part of life.
Yeah, yeah. When we have a ton to learn from the disability rights movement and their fantastic motto, which is nothing about us without us, you know, and make sure that in every group you're in that there's age diversity as well as other types of diversity. Yes.
No, I thought it was kind of interesting because last year I was comparing...
Temporarily able-bodied is what people with disabilities call the rest of us. Sorry.
No, I was comparing long-term health insurance policies, and an insurance company agent came to our house and said the number one reason for long-term health care insurance is because of dementia or Alzheimer's as they get older. That's the number one cost in it.
50% or so of the people in nursing homes do have advanced dementia,
Right.
or even higher maybe.
And so she said, so if you decide to take this particular policy, it's likely you'll get a call from the insurance company, and in that call they ask you some questions, and at the end of the call they'll see if you have any cognitive...
If you remember who you're talking to.
Right. And so we got the call, and the first question was, what was today's date? And like every single day, I look at my phone or...
I never know what date it is.
Because I don't know what date it is until I, or can't remember. But I've been doing that all the time. So I thought, gee, I hope I get the insurance, because, But anyway, but that's what they said, that the number one reason for long-term health care
That's true. Funny you should say, because I just applied for long-term health care, and they did the whole thing, and they did the quiz, and they turned me down because I have osteoporosis. Yeah, right? That's what was I sort of tried to appeal. It's like, is this really puts me at risk of institutional care? They didn't, I know. I'm going to try and figure out how to make noise about it. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kate Bunting.
Hi, Kate.
Age. We are a global organization that's looking at the issues of aging all around the world. But I wanted to just touch on the thing about a public health campaign on ageism. Your luck. The International Day of Older Persons is on October 1st. The theme this year is a theme on ageism and countering ageism.
Yeah,
the group of folks being led through the World Health Organization, but different organizations around the world that will be kind of carrying this theme, and we'll be doing something here in the U.S. and hope that everybody will.
Yeah, it's the theme for the United Nations, and I'm giving the keynote at the UN. Did you know that? Whoa. Yeah, thank you. It really, and what I'm trying to think if I can get away with the title there, Confront Ageism or The Rest is Noise. I probably need to do something a little less in your face. But it's really true that whether you have expertise in Medicare or nursing home administration or housing policy or workforce policy, if we don't look inside between our ears at our own, the ways in which we are ageist, it's sort of counterintuitively, right? Not for evidence that we're not, but at the prejudice that we have all internalized over a lifetime. I catch myself saying and thinking ageist stuff all the time. It's ongoing, and we haven't had any counter messages in the culture until really recently. But so that's essential. And then whatever field of expertise you have, and then once you start to see it, it's like a genie getting out of a bottle. You see it everywhere. And then you can bring that awareness to whatever your expertise is. If we don't take that initial step, all we do is Band-Aids. We really just do short fixes without addressing the structural discrimination. You know, you can eat all the sushi you want if you can afford it, but it doesn't help the fact that you can't get a job. You know, that shit is discrimination. You, and then you.
I'm just curious because thinking about comparing ageism to all the other isms, I come from a marketing background, so the biggest thing is, you know, having other people who aren't in your group understand your experience, right? So that they care about your movement too. The unique thing about ageism is that everybody has the experience. So I'm just wondering if you thought about that at all, and maybe it's kind of touching on your age, I forget the term you use, but aging indifference or
Old person in training?
well, it's just like are in denial.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Aging denial. Is
Yeah.
it the aging denial that's keeping people from really embracing? Because it's not like it's just helping this small group of people. It's everybody, hopefully.
Right. I mean, age denial is the heart of the problem, as long as we pretend we're not getting older, you know, and then, you know, and we celebrate the ability to change and adapt through life until we hit late middle age, and then suddenly the goal becomes to like put on the brakes and have everything stay the same, which is A, crazy, and B, not doable and, you know, punitive. The weird thing about ageism is that, of course, it affects everyone, and it's really important, I think, always to point out, of course, it disproportionately affects older people, but it also affects young people. You know, it's really hard to be in your 20s, and one of the things that makes it harder is this message like, peak life right now, if you're not, you know, building that career and having awesome sex with someone really beautiful every night, downhill from here. So, you know, I mean, that sucks. And that is ageism. So it's really important to point out that these forces affect our whole life. And another way I've been thinking about it a lot, is that this whole idea of that, you know, that diversity is important, I think, is critically important. And so is this idea of, big word alert, intersectionality, which was a word that came out of Black feminist studies, which when the scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw realized that racism, the civil rights movement didn't address gender issues. The women's movement wasn't addressing race issues. Well, all these forms of oppression intersect and reinforce each other. So, and the UN, we're going to be calling for a convention on the rights of older people. And what I want to say is, you know, there is already a convention on the rights of women, on the rights of children, on the rights of people with disabilities. If you pass a convention on the rights of older people, most older people are women. It affects children too, and many of us age into disability. So when we combat ageism, you know, kumbaya, we make the world a better place to be female in, to be a person of color in, to be, you know, all those other things. So I think, does that answer your question? I think that's the meta message, is it does affect you, it affects you now, and whatever your personal issue happens to be, there's a way in which it is, I mean, you know, are the people in your movement of all ages, you know, is one thing to look at. And who was, yes?
You had mentioned earlier that the numbers of Alzheimer's patients has gone down. Why do you?
The incidence, they don't know. They don't know why. And so other things, like it was a big piece in the New York Times about the incidence of old age. It's on my Facebook page, which is This Chair Rocks Facebook page. And I should say it's available in all electronic editions and in a audiobook read by me. But I put a ton of interesting research up on my Facebook page. Also, my blog is thischairrocks.com/blog, or you can just go to it. And all my research, it's searchable, so it's all there. You can write me, Ashton Applewhite at Gmail, or I'm easy to find since I'm the only person with my weird name. And also, there's a free downloadable guide to starting a consciousness raising group around age bias, which is how I met my friend Alberto, who lives here, called Who Me? Ageist. And it draws on, you know, the sort of the way the women's groups were structured, and gives questions and resources also. Yes, okay. How are we doing? Last question.
I'm very impressed with your eloquence, and I was wondering,
Thank
what
you.
is your educational background?
it's even lamer and weirder than my publishing. I'm undereducated. I have no degrees. Well, I did go to the National Cathedral School for Girls, which was hideous, but I learned to write. I learned to do my homework. I learned to focus. And then I went to the Kirkland College, which is the coordinate college of Hamilton, which got eaten by Hamilton. And that's all the school I had. I'm a completely auto whatever. DIY. Picking autodidact. Kind of, yeah. Thank you all for coming. I hope I'll be over there. Thank you. Let's see if I have a nice pen.
Please take advantage of the opportunity to purchase your book for $18, and Ashton will sign it. Let's give her another round of applause, please.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.